Well, hello there, and welcome back to another Mordheim video. In today's video, I wanted to talk about a topic that actually came to my mind again after the few last Let's Play episodes, which is injuries. If you didn't watch the last few episodes, I actually lost two quite high-level warp guards in my last few episodes, simply because the first one I just fucked up, and the second one just got one shot by an impressive. Just charged in, crit 3 times in a row, just fell over dead. One lost an arm, one lost a leg, and got two other injuries. One removed a strength point, an offensive point, and the other just took away some of his weapon skill. I had to kick both of these guys out because their injuries were just too crippling to keep them. But at which point can you show that injury is just too crippling to keep, or just makes the warrior not worth keeping? Well, to show you a few examples of crippling, not so crippling, and really crippling wounds, I've loaded up this warband. This is one of my oldest warbands. I have created this shortly after I started the game. My first warband was actually a chaos warband. This is, I believe, the third I created, and where I tested a lot of stuff with. I've played on and off, and actually played around with the DLC characters in this warband as well. And in this example, I want to show you a few injuries which are bad or not so bad. So, let's start with a few of the more minor injuries. One of them would be, for example, on him. He is level 10. He's not optimal build. I'm trying to play him as a melee, but I think he's better ranged. I'm not sure yet, but whatever. Not talk about builds here. He has gotten a number of wounds, but pretty much all of his wounds were pretty minimal through to completely irrelevant. Like, he has 2 times amnesia, which just didn't do anything because he's still level 10. Demon Pool, which actually gave a bonus experience, and balanced out one of the amnesias, and Burst Eardrum, which is pretty much completely irrelevant. Like 25% penalty, 25% penalty to perception tests is really not that bad. So there are wounds which pretty much don't have any effect on your warriors. Now let's get to one of the others that are a bit more bad. Yes, so my example for him. He has lost 1 agility point, which is also not that much of a big deal. The only thing it really did is slow him down, at least in his case. There are of course warriors where losing 1 agility can be quite bad. For example, in this game warband, it would actually make big difference, but for him it's not that terrible. It is of course annoying because it reduces the stat line, but it's still not the end of the world. There are debuffs for wounds for pretty much every stat. Most of them are not that terrible, but they are still annoying, depending on what stat you want to go with that warrior. Another one that would be a bit more irritating would be, let's see if I can find someone. I'm sure someone had that injury. Not you. Here, this one. Internal wound, which is actually pretty bad. Depending on the warrior you want to play, it can be crippling. It doesn't have to be, but it can be very crippling, especially for a hero. Eternal Wound has the effect that you lose 1 offensive point, which you might think, oh, that's not that much of a big deal. But I can tell you, for a lot of warriors, it is. For him, for example, it just makes him a lot less effective, because he cannot attack with the two-handed weapon twice, which makes it possible for him to carry a halberd, or quite pointless actually. Maybe for a first charge, but that you would have to switch anyway, so it's not that much. He can still attack 2 times with a sword or another one-handed weapon though, so it's not completely crippling, but it's one of the worst injuries you can get. And you can also see some more, -1 alertness, not that terrible. Amok is another one that can be annoying, but in most cases is manageable unless it's a skirmisher. I believe in my Let's Play I had one of my Skaven that was supposed to be a ranged student get Amok, and at some point I just had to kick him out because he got wounded 2 more times, and yeah. A lot of that was thanks to Amok, because he was supposed to use his shurikens, but if he got into melee combat he couldn't disengage, so he was then stuck in melee combat, which led to him getting beat up quite a few times when I overextended. But for a melee character, it's not that terrible. Very rarely you will lose something because of a mock, unless you really have to disengage him to save him, but well, in that case you're just out of luck. Now we get to the more crippling wounds. Reducing stats and all is already bad, but manageable in a lot of cases, but to show one of the really terrible examples, we have here my leader. He's a level 10 captain, so he's maxed out. He has pretty much spent all of his skill points. He has a really high weapon skill and strength, and his job was to be a parrying guy. The center stone of my defensive line, just hold them up and parry and counterattack without the parrying. Losing an arm crippled him severely. For the simple reason, he can no longer use a shield, which actually drops his parry stance by quite a lot. It's still really high because he's max level and has 16 dropping weapon skill, but still it cripples him. Also, it's disabled some of his abilities, like Shield Specialist, which I actually had on rank 1, and this guy's pretty much useless now. Also, it takes away a lot of its potential defense, because a shield actually gives you quite a lot of melee resistance, which is pretty important if you want to have a good tank. Like, in his case, he's still not completely crippled. He can still attack 4 times with a sword with a strength of 15, so he will do damage anyway. But still, if he would still have his arm and shield, he would be way more effective. And also he had the opportunity to take it to another, like a halberd, and do even more damage, because he could attack 3 times with it. Another one over here, losing a leg. Maybe you don't think it's not that big of a deal, but it is for him. Simply because he can now not really keep up with any of my other henchmen. And if I was to give him heavy armor, he would just couldn't move at all, pretty much. But at this point you have to ask yourself, which of these wounds are crippling enough to kick a warrior out, and at which point can you afford to kick someone out, and at which point you pretty much have to keep him. For this Warband X, for example, I had to keep him. I couldn't kick him out. Even with just 1 arm, at level 10 he was still way more effective than anything I could have recruited. Like, the highest thing I can get is level 4 for some reason on this Warband, because I didn't get any new mercenaries yet. Like, do I want a rank 4 leader? No. If I had to, I would recruit something like a rank 7 or 8. And even that would be still have to equip him. So I have to keep him for now. There's no getting around it. I don't have an alternative. In his case, for example, I could kick him out. Wouldn't be the worst. He's just level 7, which is not that high for this warband in particular, because pretty much most of the others are just rank 10 or really high. And I have backup, so it's not that terrible. But especially when you're early in a campaign, having someone like a level 2, let's say all your warband are ranked 1 or 2, and having a level 2 hero completely crippled by losing an arm can be quite devastating. Because at this point he was starting to get actually useful and not getting one shot anymore in any mission. So is there a point in then keeping that rank 2 hero? In most cases I would say no. Just start leveling him up at this point before it gets even worse and you don't have an opportunity to level up from the beginning. Otherwise he will just be a burden for the rest of the time, and the longer you keep him, the more experience and the more gold you invest into him, and you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to keep someone like this? There are of course other injuries which are not completely crippling, but just annoying to handle with and require you to do something special to deal with them. In this case, you already know that if you watch any of my Let's Play videos. He has a skull fracture, which is a mental condition that forces him to do a stupidity test, which is an intelligence test, before he has to do anything every round. Which means that if he's not that high intelligence, he will most likely not pass these tests, and it could very well be that he stands around doing nothing the entire mission. To get around that, you can play with guidance, which is what I'm doing. I also do the same thing in my Let's Play. I have guidance on 1 or multiple characters and just put them onto the stupid one at the start of the mission, if I remember, and he will be fine. You have to refresh it from time to time, but if he gets into combat, you should not have that much of a problem, because then you don't have to do the test anymore. So yeah, as you can see, there are a multitude of injuries in this game that can happen if your characters get down in the mission, or if they get critted, for example. That can also happen. Some of them are really crippling, some of them are just a nuisance. But all of them should be taken into consideration when you build up your warband. Do you want to keep someone who has multiple injuries, or do you want to get a new warrior? Can you afford to get a new warrior? Can you afford to level up a new warrior? Those are all questions that you have to take into consideration when you are deciding if you want to keep a warrior or not. In most cases, especially in the early game, I would just, if someone gets wounded, just replace him if it's a bad wound, like losing offensive point or an arm or leg, just replace him. Later into the game, you can play around things. What can be still really crippling are wounds like this, so simply because you are seriously limiting your offensive potential here by not being able to use 200 weapon anymore, which is pretty bad. Like, for example, in my Let's Play, I recently lost 2 warp guards. One, like I said, one to a lost leg, one to a lost arm. Simply because, even though they were quite high level, they weren't not level 10 or anything, so I could still get new ones, like 1 or 2 levels below that. I would have to spend a lot of money into that, but did I want to invest more money and experience into a guy that would never get into a real tank? Like, without a shield or a 200 weapon, he would never be able to do really what I want him to do. Or in that case of the other guy, losing a leg and an offensive point, he was severely crippled and not really useful for anything at this point. He would be too slow to keep up with the rest of my warband because he can only have heavy armor proficiency rank 1, so his movement was already really limited. And in Scale warband, I'm relying on my ability to move around faster than the enemy and maneuver them to really be effective. So yeah, all these things are things you need to take into consideration when deciding about your warriors in terms of injuries. If you've enjoyed this little guide video, please leave me down a comment and leave me down a like. And if you enjoy my content in general, consider giving me a sub. Until then, have a nice day.